All right. Well, hi and welcome to PAX Safer Together. This one is Thinking Clearly Under Pressure. It's a roundtable discussion. My name's Sharon, and I'll be moderating. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for coming. And Jason, can you start us off? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, my name's Jason Mix, and I've been teaching martial arts for 40 years and studying conflict. I'm really excited about doing this one in particular. We've had a chance to do several programs with PAX so far, and the concept of self-protection, not just self-defense, but all the stuff that comes before and after, I think is really, really important. And I'm really excited. When we were doing these programs, I started to notice that the same things that happen when we have imminent threat in person, I was having when watching media or engaging in different types of media. And so we thought, well, can we apply the same principles we would to an attack to situations like social media, like email, and how can we work with that? So when we look at different attacks, we have physical attacks, we have verbal attacks, we have emotional attacks and mental attacks. As we start to learn to deal with these, it's important to watch that chemistry, see what's going on in yourself, and realize other places that might be happening. Remember that as we work on doing these, the important part is to get to safety, to stay safe, to work with other people, and to realize that even when you're doing social media and stuff, you are in a public space, and sometimes you are actually being purposely attacked. So we have to ask ourselves, what is the harm? What is the attack that's happening? Matthew, could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So obviously I'm Matthew. I'm also one of the instructors here at the Center for International Arts. So the harm when it comes to these kinds of things, there's a lot of things that can kind of come up as you kind of encounter them. We all kind of understand this idea of like anxiety or social anxiety. I'm sure you know somebody who has talked about it, or you've read articles about how the rise of anxiety has been going up over the years as we've increased our kind of connection via like immediate response, immediate thing, media trying to constantly get your attention and all of these things. And it can leave you feeling particularly pretty helpless, right? Like if your phone is on you all the time, it's pretty easy to see a lot of news is trying to reach you, a lot of social media, everything's trying to claw at your time. And the best way that they can do that is really by trying to play out towards your emotions. It's going to leave you pretty stressed as well, right? The other one that you see a lot of as well is like things like harassment or cyberbullying, right? Like if all of your friends really only interact in these kinds of spaces, if those spaces don't feel accommodating to you, it can be pretty taxing, right? We want to make sure that you have a spot where you don't feel like you're being stifled or that your voice doesn't matter. And then of course, the other one that we all know of that sometimes people kind of like to downplay is like the idea of like cyber theft, fraud, or scams, right? Phishing scams, those things. As time progresses, they get more and more sophisticated, and you just have to be aware of that kind of thing. I guess that's kind of that little section, right? Like talks about kind of those things that make us vulnerable.
Thanks, Matthew. Rich, can you please introduce yourself and tell us what do we mean by thinking and acting clearly?
Sure, I'm Rich. So many things went through my head when I introduced, but I will just keep it to I've done martial arts for 30 years. You can probably tell, not originally from the United States. I'm not Australian. I'm actually English, if you want to know. So thinking and acting clearly, that is about our perception and processing of information and ensuring that it's accurate. Obviously, if you're under a stressful situation like Matthew talked about, then sometimes you can perceive or process informations incorrectly or get things out of proportion, and can lead to a compromised state. And obviously, if you're in a compromised state, then your responses and your actions aren't necessarily going to be appropriate to the situation. So for me, I was actually talking to my wife about why I get so agitated personally from online communication, and we've talked in some of the other self-protection seminars, whatever we've done online, about the principle of clarity is kindness. And I get agitated particularly when people haven't thought through something in detail. They haven't used critical thinking, there's no plan, they haven't thought through the consequences. And then particularly when the communication is disingenuous. And so I always just used to say that, your audio needs to match your video, so the actions need to match the words. So I get particularly agitated when those things aren't in place. So, and we'll talk about self-awareness, and obviously online, you need to be assessing, acting, and thinking clearly.
Very good. Jason, can you talk a little bit about what we mean by under pressure?
Yes. So as we're going through in a physical altercation, it's really easy to tell that there's someone attacking you, and if they mean to attack you. Maybe not as easy as we would think, but it becomes relatively clear quickly. So what are some things we can see those same mechanisms are affecting us when we're online or we're engaged with different types of media? Could even be just watching something we can get so upset about, or we may not even know that we're upset. So we look for the sympathetic nervous system responses, which are fight, flight, freeze, fawn, friend, or flop. And so you'll see those in greater and lesser extents in your body. If you've been coming to some of our other offerings, we talk a little bit more about that and how that works. And just a real quick, fight doesn't mean that you're actually punching someone, although it could. It's that urge to stop what's going on. It's that feeling that something is wrong and you need to oppose it. And this is taken advantage of, this creation of this type of outrage. And so know that your sympathetic is engaged. Some of the negatives of the sympathetic are lack of judgment. So taking the time to breathe, to relax, to focus when that happens. Same thing with the flight, where you just want to run away. You want to get as far away from it as possible. Again, it's often done on purpose, and even if it's not on purpose, it doesn't necessarily bring out the best in us. So taking that time and trying to initiate the relaxation response is really helpful. When we look at freeze is another one. This one can have some relatively positive effects when we're online, taking that time to think before we act and assess ourselves. So as we go through, when we have that feeling of a friend where we don't want to oppose what the other person is doing, we somehow want to make them like us or something from what they're saying, and then sometimes people will think that means you agree with them when you don't necessarily. So again, taking that time, finding that relaxation response, and then that flop response, that feeling of just you can't go on, where everything shuts down. So when those things happen, realize that something is causing them, and we need to do something to counteract the negative effects. They're senses. They're things that let us know something is wrong. And so when that happens, you don't want to ignore it. You don't want to just judge yourself for it. You want to see it as a sense. It tells you something. What is it telling you? What's the best way to respond? One of the things I'm really excited about is being able to engage the parasympathetic nervous system with the sympathetic nervous system, so the relaxation response with the fight or flight response, in order to create that flow state, that peak performance state. And the really neat thing about that is you don't have to do much more than initiate the relaxation response in order to make that happen. Once the sympathetic has happened, just learning to engage that sympathetic and parasympathetic at the same time is really helpful. And it can be a really easy way to take the time you need and see what's coming next. See if that information is reliable or unreliable. So what is an attack? So some easy things to look out for that our bodies tell us is something dangerous is misinformation, disinformation, harmful or malinformation. Those are things that really kind of your body will have a response to. So taking some
What kind
time.
of response, Jason?
So this fight or flight or freeze.
Which emotions is it trying to feed?
So as we're working together, if we look at that fight, that's going to be kind of the outrage response. When we look at that flight, it's going to be that feeling of fear. Okay. When we look at freeze, that's shock, and we've all seen that online, where you look and you go, I just can't believe that's right. So you'll have those feelings of anger, those feelings of fear, and those feelings of shock as we go through. Is that kind of what you were talking about?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you. Matthew, can you talk a little bit then about how our outrage and fear get fueled by the outrage economy?
Yeah, so outrage economy, as you would kind of suggest, right? Like, if we think about just the word economy, right? Like we think about like finance and money and things like that. People make money off of social media. Particularly bad faith actors also make a lot of money off of it because they get engagement, right? Like anytime you see like a headline and it's like, oh, is your car about to explode with this, important recall? The answer is probably no, but they want you to click on it, right? They want you to engage on it. That should spark that fear, right? Or if you're saying like, oh, you're viewing this and your sports team just decided they're going to move somewhere else potentially because they don't like your town anymore. You're like, no, they probably just got offered a better contract somewhere else, but they're trying to stoke that anger, right? They want you to be upset, right? That's what an outrage economy is. More engagement, they get more revenue. So they want to really encourage that in their algorithms, whether it's, a classic social media platform or a news outlet or really any kind of thing that you're going to be engaging with, advertisements as well, right? They want that response.
And are you more likely to engage with positive content or negative content?
Generally, people used to think that you would tend to seek content that agrees with you. And like, there is some truth to that, but a lot more stuff has come out recently from like, Mokan or like Tulane University or Duke or some other ones, right? Where they're talking about that in general, people tend to seek content or at least interact with content that has some kind of inflammatory response, right? Whether it's, something that makes you upset or something that you're like, I can't believe that's true. And then you click on it to read more about it. Like, I know I do that, right? Where I'm like, that can't be true. That doesn't make any sense.
Oh, I do
and
that
so,
all the time.
And so I'll click on it and I'm like, I can't believe I fell for it again.
Yeah.
That's definitely one that you're like, you just kind of have, you got to know what what kind of things you interact with.
They do that on the news too.
Of course, for sure. Yeah. And so, people used to think that the prevailing theory was that like there's confirmation bias, that people seek that out. And it's possible that it may have been that way back then, but these days, with the more current theories, right, being that outrage economy, that tends to be the way the current landscape is at the very least.
Rich, I keep reading about moral outrage. Can you talk on that a little?
I can. Let me just add a little bit for Matthew, which is when I was at Microsoft, I'm not there anymore, but I remember Trevor Noah speaking. And it was either he had done the research, I think it was actually, I want to say that he had done the research, and they literally looked at social media and they assessed whether people engaged more on, to your point, whether it was kind or if provoked. And the research very clearly found that that people engaged more. They did clicks or shares or whatever when people were provoked. And as you said, the algorithms are now set up to that. So when we talk about, obviously, one of the first stages of self-protection is being aware. The key thing, obviously, is being aware that they're deliberately trying to provoke you. And so comes on to the second thing, which is self-awareness, right? And so related to moral outrage, being aware, as Jason talked about, of your response. But we all will feel moral outrage in some context. The moral outrage is just, in the most simple terms, whether you think something's fair based on your values and how you think about social justice. Obviously, it can be a good thing in certain contexts if it leads to compassion and empathy and you acting to help somebody. Not so great if it leads to contempt or loathing or other things. And I think the other thing is, just like we all have unconscious bias, we'll probably get into this, every media it has editorial bias of some kind, even if you don't think it does, it does. We also always all have a moral compass of some degree, some have more than others. And we're not immune to this moral outrage, and actually it can be addictive. You get a dopamine hit when you face some of this content and are outraged by it.
Matthew, what are some ways that we combat this?
So, when we talk about our program in particular, we talk about helping you to understand responses to things that are threatening to you. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to cause you physical harm in this specific context, but it is causing you harm, right? Your mental health is still your health. And so you want to understand your responses to things with your sympathetic nervous system, which we've talked about, with the 5 Fs, right, in our previous PAC stuff and earlier in this one as well. And then your parasympathetic nervous system, which is the relaxation response. We've talked about before in our previous sessions as well about how to create that peak performance where you have the parasympathetic and sympathetic working in tandem. This is a pretty important state. You'll also hear it called the flow state as well, but it's really important for that peak performance and also for your health, right? The nervous system is great, or the sympathetic nervous system is really great at getting you out of immediate danger, but it releases a lot of chemicals in your body, and those chemicals aren't great for you to have in your body all the time, right? When we think of very commonly cortisol, right? Cortisol is often referred to as the stress hormone, and it's not great for your body, right? It can lead to things like heart attack and strokes and things like that, in its most extreme example, of course. And that's not great for your body to just have that in that system all the time and sit there, right? It's not good for you. It can also lead to a lot of things like really heightened anxiety and things like that. But the parasympathetic's job is to kind of balance that out, kind of reset the system. So really focusing on stimulating the parasympathetic system in an ideal world should be about a little more than the sympathetic nervous system, but they're close to even. But with the way that life is, life is rarely easy for most people, and there's a lot of things that are stressors, and particularly with the way that life tends to deal with you nowadays is really tries to prey on that kind of stress and anxiety and things like that. So we really want to focus on that parasympathetic nervous system so it can really kind of help us in our day-to-day life, because we already get enough stress, whether it's driving here, like my drive here was almost triple its normal length. So that was awesome. But great chance to work on my breathing and my relaxation response, because people are bad drivers.
It's true. Which brings us to our next part, which is Jason's going to lead us through a breathing exercise.
So as Matthew was mentioning, I think we said before, we're not trying to get rid of the fight or flight response. We're trying to mitigate the negative effects of it while keeping the positive effects of it. And ways that we can get the parasympathetic to work. One is counting things, so just the act of counting things helps to do that. Another is that self-reflection, kind of looking at what's going on in our body. Just by checking to see if it's working, you help to make it work. And one good way to do that, again, is with breathing. I'd like to do a couple breathing exercises today. So the first one, if you're at a table, you have your computer here, or not, palms up, head suspended from above as if by a string. Relax your shoulders. Breathing from your center, this is lower diaphragmatic breathing. I like to put my feet flat on the floor so I can feel the floor underneath me and the sky above me. And then from here, breathing in like you were filling up a vase with water. Rotate Breathing out, letting it empty from the top down to the bottom. Repeat. 2, breathing in. Slight pause at the top. Breathing out. Slight pause at the bottom. One more time. Breathing in. Breathing out. And doing this practice every day, I think, is really helpful. If you're in a place where you can't be rising and falling with your hands, let's do the same thing visualizing, but not using our hands. So we have that concept of moving up and down. You can even imagine doing that with your hands. But here, head is suspended from above, feet are flat on the floor, elongate the spine, lower diaphragmatic breathing. Breathe all the way out. Breathing in. Breathing out just a little longer than you breathed in. If I was breathing in for 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, I'd breathe out for 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And it's difficult to get this to work if you're only doing it when you're stressed. So really recommend do these breathing exercises in the most peaceful place you can find, and then slowly use them in different areas where you're practicing with minor stressors. And that way it gets better and better. Don't think that you don't do any breathing exercises and then things are highly stressful and you do that once and it's going to be beneficial. It needs to be a regular practice. Pay attention to the instincts and emotions of the people around you as well. These can give you valuable information much earlier than you might otherwise be aware of it. So this kind of chemistry is somewhat contagious. So it spreads. If you get more stressed, that stress can kind of spread. As you are able to relax and focus, that can spread as well, which is really kind of exciting.
Matthew, how does this apply to information and interactions in everyday life, social media, news, etc.?
Yeah, so when we're looking at this, particularly when we're looking at new information, regardless of whatever type it is, there's a whole lot of things you can look at. There's a million different things you can think about, and it's kind of overwhelming. So I tried to keep it down to really kind of 3 salient points that I can really have some kind of control or agency over. The first being is like, do I have an open mind about the information, right? Like, if I'm not gonna have an open mind, is it, should I even be reading it right now, right? Like, I'm not gonna learn something if I'm not open to learning. So I gotta check that first part first, right? So like, what, for you guys, like, what's an example of something like you've looked at and you had to like kind of double check whether or not you had a good open mind at?
Never have that.
It happens to me so many times, and it just.
One of the things that I find is, if I meet someone and they don't speak the same language, sometimes I feel like it's going to be difficult to understand them and work together, and sometimes those are the people that through just trying to bridge that gap, we connect on an even deeper level.
And being on the other side of that, going to a new country, when I'm a beginner in that language, I suddenly feel so much dumber.
Yeah.
Like I'm the same person I was, I just can't tell them what I'm thinking. So
I actually have a business situation like that I learned early on, and that's through email. And I realized, I was on a leadership team in Canada, and I realized I was treating emails from 2 of my different colleagues in different ways. And one of them, because I trusted him implicitly, I was just like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. And somebody else, I was like, what are you talking about? And then I realized if you start with positive intent in every context, it changes it. And so I just viewed the guy I trusted implicitly, everybody I viewed him as sending, if I got an email for this other guy, I viewed it as coming from him. and it just changed completely the interaction. It was a really interesting exercise.
For sure.
What's your second one?
The second one I have is like, do we have sufficient information and context? Right? Obviously, context matters a lot to a situation, right? Everything's going to be presented with an agenda, whether it's intentional or not. People just have bias. It's going to happen. If you think your favorite social media or news or whatever doesn't, it does. It's written by people. Well, hopefully it's written by people. That used to always be the case, but now it's now
And AI has bias too.
yeah, exactly. And AI is also really biased too, because it doesn't even know it's biased because it's just AI. But yeah, that's also a really important one is, is it written by people? That's also going to matter quite a bit. But, it's like when you're looking at the agenda and the information and the context, is it actually like relevant to the thing you're reading, right? Like, I think we've all looked at an article or whatever that cites a source, and then you go and you click the source and there's nothing there.
It's a garbage source.
Right? It's not real, right? And you're like, oh, you're citing nothing.
That's one of my triggers, actually, is even worse when it's just a picture of a news article and it doesn't have any links to the news article. And of course, it's got some, outrageous headline and a picture that's terrible.
Yeah.
You're like, but is this true? I can't tell from this. It could be anything.
Yeah.
One of my favorites is you'll see a brilliant argument, and it's like this incredible argument. It's like insightful, it's well cited, everything is great, and then it has a conclusion at the end that has nothing to do with the article. And you'll even argue with the person, and you go, this makes no sense, and they'll go, well, this argument is like just right, and you're like, yeah, it's a great argument, but it has nothing to do with the conclusion. So
yeah, where they're like, oh yeah, if turning on red can be good in some situations and not in other
oranges
situations.
are tasty.
Yeah, and you're like, wow. Also, I was also going to say oranges are tasty, so that's pretty fun. That's pretty fun.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, and then our third one is, does the information matter, right? Like when you're looking at this stuff, right? Like I've talked about this before with friends, where it's like, oh yeah, there was this thing on, I can't remember which social media app it was, but it was one of them, where people were arguing about a character's outfit being teal versus green, which, as you know, they're fairly similar colors, right? There's green and teal. And people were so heated about it. People started throwing slurs and like horrible hate speech and death threats at each other because it just kept escalating and escalating and escalating. I'm like, this does not matter. Objectively, in all situations, the color of somebody's outfit is not going to be worth threatening somebody's life over, right? Just objectively.
But that gemstone in Splendor is purple.
Sure.
That's one that we fight over
Yeah.
at home.
Yeah.
Everybody else says it's a different color, but to me it looks purple.
Yeah, it's definitely not. But that's all right. Which, by the way, is a great game, though.
Is it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Highly
really
recommend.
fun. Yeah, really fun avenue to play. But as we can, think about those three kind of things, do we have an open mind? Is there sufficient information? And does it actually matter to our daily lives to kind of be invested in? We want to talk about these and as we kind of like preserve our mental safety and health, and kind of like our five main avenues here. We have social media, broadcast media, which is like TV, radio, that kind of stuff. There's propaganda, which is propaganda about everything and everywhere. And then we have phishing scams and then advertising, right? We have all seen an ad. There's some horrific studies that talk about the fact that we see some absurdly huge volume of ads every day, even if you don't even think you're seeing ads. You're constantly seeing ads and they're just really well disguised. So that's one where I'm like, ooh, that's scary. It was like over 600 ads for the average person or some
Really?
astronomical
Wow.
number. Because, every time you're driving, right? Like, think about all the signs you see as you pass. Think about all the times you're scrolling. Like, somebody spends an hour on TikTok, right? They're just swiping. They're constantly seeing ads for things.
For
Even
sure.
ones that are disguised as not being an ad.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. It's
I know. I love it.
pretty wild.
The apps for television networks now. They used to be free, and then you paid for them, and then they were ad free, and now you still pay for them, and then showing you ads again. And even those, they were tricky in that, you know, when you weren't being shown ads, you were being shown ads. They were just part of the episode, you know, so,
Yep.
you know, Pottery Barn donated the furniture for this one and this other one for that one. And so you're being sold all the time. But that brings us to our next thing. We're going to kind of switch gears and talk about the 4 phases of protection now, self-protection. And so Matthew, can you start us on that?
Yeah, so the first one for that is kind of like being alert and having a healthy mindset, right? Like, how can you know yourself? How can you be proactive? You know, that kind of thing before anything is directly intervened into your life, so to speak.
So this is like the one that you spend the most time in. This is
Yeah.
like day to day.
Exactly. This is your main focus for most people. If you also want to hear a little bit more about these 4 phases of self-protection, our previous PAX ones as well, feel free to check those out. We do talk about them in very good detail, but we're going to talk about them in the sense of like online literacy instead of physical literacy. They're just going to be a little different, but the same general archetypes. So when we get to our proactive practices, you want to know yourself. What are like the things that really get you going, you know, things that kind of give you your stress response? Like we've all talked about today, different ones that get us to interact and things like that. When it comes to things that I tend to interact, right, we talked about the 5 F's. When it comes to online interactions, my first one tends to be the fight response. Not because I'm like, I'm gonna beat somebody up over this, but I'm like, why are you lying? Like, you don't gain anything by lying about this point, right? Like, and that, because I don't like when people spread misinformation. I mean, I don't think most people like that, but that's one that, like, particularly, I'm like, I would rather be corrected and be wrong than to have the incorrect information out there. And
Same.
yeah, so that's one of the ones that gets me. But for you, you know, all of you at home, and for all of us here, you know, take a moment to think about like a low-level thing you've experienced and how you reacted. You know, like an example would be like if you got your coffee order wrong. For me, I'm gonna go over my I'm gonna go over my drive today, where just people would not drive at this, you know, stoplight went green, and then, like, you know, the cars were sitting there, and then all of the cars in front of the car in front of me just, you know, went because it's a green light, and then the car in front of me decided to give like 3 bus lengths of space between that and the first, you know, the previous cars, and I'm like, I want to make sure I'm trying to get here. It's a light that's notoriously takes a really long time near where we live, so it's like, please just go. And then a whole bunch of cars didn't make the light because that person just wasn't going. And so, like, in that moment I was like, I can't fight that. Like, I can't do anything about it, right? Like, I mean, I could honk if I really wanted to, but it's not going to change the person. They're on their phone, they've made their choice.
Yeah, and they might have already been spooked, or, you know.
Yeah, you know, like, it's like, yeah. So I know that in that response, it's not really a fawn or any of those freeze ones. It's still that kind of fight response, because I'm like, I want to do something, but I also have that parasympathetic
So you have
response.
that feeling in your body.
Where it's like, I can feel it from the sympathetic response, and then my parasympathetic response is also active generally whenever I have that. And so it's like, okay, I can't do a lot with it, but I know it's there. How about you guys? Do you guys have one in particular that speaks
I don't know how people are driving today, but I almost got hit on the way here, and I was, and it probably comes into something I talk about later on, but I was turning left, and I obviously had right away, and this car was coming, and I'm watching them, and I'm coming, and we're coming, and I had to slam on the brakes, otherwise I wouldn't have been here either. And yeah, it's and obviously you're sympathetic, and you know, well, I guess it was, I don't know if it's fight or flight. It's probably flight, because I slammed the brakes on rather than going into the side of a car, which is probably the right decision.
I would generally prefer that for you, is to not get T-boned by another car.
One of the things I think is kind of neat, you saw in several of these examples, is oftentimes when the sympathetic is engaged, another form of the sympathetic will be its response. So, like, for me, one of the things that triggers me is if people are fearful and there's not a reason, or the reason isn't helpful for them to be fearful, that tends to make me want to either fight or flop, shut down. And so realizing that oftentimes when your fight or flight is engaged, it's because someone else's is engaged also. And then those two feed off of each other and grow. If you can do something like slam on your brakes and cut that situation, that's kind of ideal. If you can take the time, like Matthew, when he realized that he was getting the information from the fight or flight feeling and was able to then get into a calm state and remember that more important than getting there at a specific time was to get here safe. That is a much, much better use of the combination of the two. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I thought of two things. And one was the coffee order. And when they tend to get my order wrong, I'm one of those that tend to be like, well, I like that one too. And then I just go off instead of, the confrontation. But interestingly, and that's the only reason why I'm bringing up two, is that online, if I see somebody like cyberbullying somebody or calling names or something, I'm fight. I'm right in there. I'm like, you stop that. That's not,
Oh, yeah.
So it's interesting. I think a lot of people actually do have a much stronger response online than they do in person.
I think that's true as well. And we're kind of, regardless of whichever response you personally use, right? Like, there's no wrong answer to any of the responses. Like, there's no judgment unless you're like actively attacking people, right? Like, still keep things civil. But just know like kind of what things you tend to do.
Information.
Yeah, and you just want to keep yourself safe and people around you safe, which leads us to kind of the next thing, right? Like when we were talking about like, in person and live services and things like that, right? So you want to curate what you see. And this doesn't mean like ignore all the viewpoints that don't agree with you, but it's try to think of things and engage with things that are constructive to you, right? Like, for example, if you really like, certain things, like I like to build Gundam models, which is owned by a company called Gunpla. They have a subreddit, and that subreddit's really positive. It's just people who like this kind of niche hobby that are like really kind and, conducive to doing that. And, they have a really good moderator team and things like that keep things really positive there. And it's, it's a nice hobby thing that I can interact with. Or if I'm going to be like reading news and stuff like that, I kind of limit my time with that. The news tends to be really important to know, but it's also kind of a dour thing most of the time, regardless of kind of where you swing on either end of a political spectrum. They're trying to outrage you, right? They're trying to do this. Everything tries to. So you try and figure out like, okay, I'll give myself a little bit of time on this and then kind of scroll on by or go past when it's something that's a little too negative for me at that time. And then when we get to things like, like phishing scams and things like that, right? Know that no company is going to ever ask you for your own information from that company. Keep your security systems up to date. Make sure you have one on your phone and your computer. Multi-factor authentication is super important. Changing your password is pretty important. And then of course, back up your data, right? Like even if you think like nothing's gonna happen to your stuff, it might not even be like a phishing scam or anything like that. Sometimes computers just break, right? They're really complicated pieces of machinery. Having backed up data is just really nice, right? Like sometimes it's just nothing you can do. Kind of last one I want to talk about is like when we get to things like email, right? Like just make sure that like the email is from the people you expect, or like texts as well. Make sure the number matches up. Make sure that it's coming from people that's supposed to be coming from. Like when I look at an email, one of the phishing scams I've seen recently was, from an Amazon help center, and it was almost identical URL or email address that it's coming from. And it was like, had a link in it and stuff. And I was like, oh yeah, make sure you enter your password and stuff. I'm like, first off, I know Amazon's never going to ask me for any of that stuff because, boy, they have a lot of information on everybody. So they're not going to need new information. They already own that. But if you're tired or like your life is going through a lot of stuff and you have like 2 minutes to view something, you might click on something, right? Like that's what they're there for. They're not expecting like you at your best. They're trying to just throw it out there to as many people as they can possibly do. So one thing we can do kind of as a nice piece of activity here So you can grab a piece of paper and a pen. I have a tablet, so I'm just gonna write on my tablet.
Can you pass this down to those guys? Here's some pencils if you want them. But you don't need one because you have a tablet.
Yeah, I have a fancy tablet here. You can take a look at like the first 10 posts or whatever on your favorite social media of your choice. You know, whether that be a Facebook, Reddit, TikTok, Instagram, doesn't matter. And then just kind of look through those things, you know, like how many of them are relevant to you? Did you actually want to see any of them? Are they from friends and family? Though obviously if you're using something like Reddit or, you know, TikTok, it's probably unlikely you're seeing as many things from friends and family, but you might. And, you know, think how many politics or social issues do you agree with or disagree with? How many of these are advertisements? How many of these are related to your interests? That kind of thing. So take a second to go do that. I'll be doing it as well. Yeah, no, it's kind of an interesting thing in particular. So like for me, mine, because my 10 posts were very quick, mine is a pretty curated list, because I don't use a lot of social media, but of the social media I tend not to use like the front pages of most things and things like that, the general broad spectrum ones, because I want really curated lists, because I tend to be interested in a lot of different things, and I tend to only kind of want to see that stuff, right? If I'm on social media, it's because I'm there kind of for a specific thing. So for me, almost all of my stuff were things I was interested in. I had 1 advertisement out of 10, which is
That's
pretty
really good.
Yeah.
That was not my feed.
Yeah.
I went to Facebook. And that was-
Yeah.
And I went to PAX's Facebook, which is not my own, that I've kind of more curated, and that one was just a hot mess. It was so many advertisements and,
Yeah.
you know, just, yeah.
Yeah, so all 10 of mine were related to my interests. 0 were from friends and family. There were no politics in mine, because mine's very curated to have no politics on that specific one, because I just used Reddit with a bunch of subreddits of like, this has 5,000 members. You're like, they're not going to be posting anything
Mine
particularly
had really
interesting.
outrageous stuff from both political parties, like really extreme viewpoints on both sides on that one,
Yeah.
which would be different than my own.
Yeah.
but
If I ever go to the homepage, though, it's a mess. It's like, oh, political thing here, outrageous thing here. And I'm like,
For sure.
yeah. How about you, Rich? What kind of stuff do you find?
Of my 10, 5 were martial arts. Not sure what that says. But actually, if you even think of those, 2 of them were pretty outrageous.
Really?
And 3 were kind of normal. 3 ads out of 10.
Wow.
And then 2 political, and the political were pretty outrageous as well. Trying to, like we talked about before, provoke.
Yep, that makes sense. A similar feed thing for mine. I was like, oh yeah, I got some martial arts ones, some HEMA things, and you know, it's like, oh, it's like HEMA, judo, and then some games I've been playing. And I was like, ah, neat.
And at home, if you want to share yours, you can drop that in the chat too.
Yeah.
Talk about it, but Jason.
Interestingly, I had 3 ads. There must have been like there's an algorithm or something. And then my particular news on mine was from comedy outlets. So
yeah, that's
I watch
nice.
my news on comedy.
You do kind of do that sometimes.
Yeah, I do sometimes.
Like a little dose of sugar with the.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Makes it easier
Exactly.
to deal with. And there was definitely some martial arts on there as well. One of the things my family sometimes gives me a hard time about is on my feed. I will often get really. I love physics and archaeology. And I think that they are outrageous and fascinating, but most of my family thinks that they are dull. And I think that's a good sign that the stuff that you're getting is well balanced, is when it's really pretty boring and 2 or 3 sided, which I do like a lot, but is not always the most engaging for everyone.
Yeah, we talked to some people from the intelligence community when we were doing this, and they were saying that actual intelligence is written to be boring because they do not want to provoke.
They want an intellectual
They
response.
don't want to provoke your emotions.
So good information is generally somewhat boring. Interestingly, when you're bored, it stimulates your parasympathetic. So if you are very excited about something, fight or flight, find a way to be bored for a minute. Watch my feed.
So Rich, we just looked at our social medias, right? And so now we may have noticed some things, which brings us to the next level. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so the next level is potential dangers and assessing potential dangers. And if we use the car analogy again, and actually we've talked about this in some of the other self-defense, self-protection sessions. If you're driving a car, you don't want to be overly stimulated or overly stressed all the time. You don't want to have that high level of activation because that's not how you want to drive and not great fun. But you want to be aware, and so you want to be driving and be aware of what's going on. You're aware of other cars. You're aware of people walking their dogs on the sidewalk. You're aware of somebody riding a bicycle, and then a ball bounces in front of you. And that's a stimulus where you just want to take immediate action and assess the potential danger. So the stimulus activates you. That's a good thing. If you do have time, you want to slow down and assess the situation, and you want to be intentional in your response. Obviously, when you're driving, you don't always have the time, as I talked about earlier on. I had to slam on the brakes, otherwise this lady in her Jeep was going to hit me. So what are some of the red flags that we face? And I say this fully conscious of I'm a middle-aged white man that uses Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp. I don't have TikTok or some of those. So take these. If you like them, use them. If you don't, forget them. So some of the red flags. Obviously, if you get unsolicited information, I'll tell a couple of stories in a second. People asking for your personal or financial information, that's a red flag. Urgency associated with that, but urgency in general, that's a tool that they use to try and to get you to act before you've had time to think through and be intentional. If something is overly simple, as Sharon said, that's another way that they try and engage you. I don't know if you're getting these as well right now, or maybe in the last year or so, I just get these texts that says, hi, or are we still on for dinner, or whatever. And they're just trying to bait you and fish and get you to connect. So it seems like there's two extremes. There's the super simple or the complex, because some of the scams are pretty sophisticated these days. It's no longer Prince sitting in Nigeria that's got millions of dollars, and if you send him $2,000, he's going to send you $1 million because he'll get out of jail. I'm probably dating myself even saying that, but they're more sophisticated, way more sophisticated. So unsolicited, simple, people having an opinion. You might have heard this one before. People are saying, that's another way that they're trying to get you engaged. Word choice, obviously, inflammatory language. If you see things like Nazi or evil or pathetic, that's trying to provoke you. Absolutes, fear, uncertainty, and doubt is another way where they try and hook you. Rhetorical questions, like this one, is another way. And then, another red flag is trying to hook into the tribalism or your tribe. So you may have seen things like this. You're not a true, fill in the word, patriot unless blah, 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 blah. You're not a true American unless blah, 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 blah. You're not a true woman unless, and so again, they're trying to engage, provoke, and so on. So they're kind of red flags to look out for. I mean, obviously this conversation that we're having today is like, how do you apply martial arts principles to online situations? So again, a couple of them are self-protection, first and foremost. In martial arts, one of the things that I was always taught was if you can control the distance, you can control the fight. And so you want to enforce boundaries. You have control, so exercise that control, probably particularly online where you can, in most cases, take some time and distance to assess a situation, do that. The other key word I think is intentional, so that you can be intentional in your response. And as we just looked at, intentional in the social media. Does the social media fulfill the why you're actually doing the social media? If it doesn't, then you should probably do something about it. So 2 quick stories that literally happened in the last 2 days. My mum is in her 80s, and she got a phone call from someone that was saying, she had a bunch of stocks and shares in an account. They didn't know exactly how much, but they could release them. And I think when you get hooked, there may be an element of truth in your life. My parents lived in Hong Kong for a while. They did have a investment account. My mum wasn't sure if it was related. But this communication was pretty sophisticated. So unfortunately, my mum reached out to me and the family, which is one of the actions we would recommend. Reach out to a buddy or a community or whatever. The email was quite sophisticated. There was an Adobe attachment that they were asking my mum to fill in so that they could get some more information. And one of the things that scammers do is they use marketing techniques. One of them is called progressive profiling. So they don't ask you for the full kitchen sink. They don't ask you for everything up front. They'll ask you for a small piece of information, and then you'll give that, and then they'll go research Facebook, and they'll know more about you or whatever. And then they'll gradually get more information, and then before you know it, they're asking you for money for something. But anyway, so we looked at this. There was a website. I went and researched the website. I obviously didn't click on a link. I went and typed in the website. There actually was a website that had lawyers. But there was typos on the website, so there was indicators again that this wasn't legit. And anyway, all of that to say, we told my mum not to to give any information on the phone or obviously through this document. And again, emphasized that she had the control. And so literally the next day they called and she just hung up on them because she was enforcing her boundaries and had control. So that was one family member. Literally yesterday, another family member, she was selling a bed on Facebook Marketplace, and she wanted cash for it. And then a guy asked, would she take anything other than cash? And she said, nope. And then he asked for a phone number. And she was very polite, but she reinforced her boundaries. She said, no, I'd prefer to do it through the Facebook Marketplace. And then the guy went off on an unhinged rant on her. And I don't know if he suddenly thought that with an unhinged rant, she's suddenly going to meet him in a strange place with somebody he doesn't know. And, anyway. But she didn't, and we've talked about this before as well, she didn't justify it, she didn't respond to him, she just blocked him. Again, she had control. And we've talked about in some of the other sessions, it's like the stop sign when you're enforcing your boundaries. It doesn't give you a paragraph of explanation why there's a red stop sign, it's stop. And so, she very politely reinforced her boundaries and blocked him. Nice. A couple of different exampple. And so, similar to the exercise we just did before, and talking about intention, again, you want to make sure that the media is fulfilling your why. And so, you can open your favorite where you get news from and take a look at that. Obviously, for me, it's BBC.
Let's assign it here. You can have BBC, you're going to do Fox, and you're going to do CNN, and I'll do MSNBC, I guess. And we're going to look, and we're going to try to find an example of one of those things. Yeah,
and whether you get an emotional reaction from seeing some of those things.
I already don't like it, so that's great.
Yep,
yeah,
first one.
The first one, yep. Yeah, talking about that sweet economic decline we're about to hit. So that was a great one for me. It's just like, oh yeah, the stock market that's losing trillions of dollars of value. I'm like, I sure do know about that. So it took me one singular one to have.
Yeah, my first one was RFK Jr.'s cure for measles is making infected kids even sicker. Like, how could you not feel some kind of outrage at making kids even sicker?
Mine actually has a picture of someone angrily pointing at me.
That'll do it.
You don't even have to read beyond that. It's just,
it really does.
Yeah, it's just angry pointing.
You are not, it sure does.
And I'm sure BBC had nothing, right?
BBC has nothing. It's all very objective and, as you'd expect, and calm and collected.
Did it really say?
But yeah, I have this.
And carry on.
Keep going, carry on.
Yeah.
But actually, I think actually genuinely, it is quite objective media. But even there, there's photos that, obviously there's Trump tariffs that were announced this week, and there's photos of his headshot with a picture of a newspaper with China. So it's designed to, again, provoke you and I guess get you to click and engage, as we talked about earlier.
And there
Wonder what
are
it says.
some news sites that try to be more neutral, but there is no neutral one, but there is two I would like to recommend real quick. One is Ground News. It's an app. It actually costs you money because they don't do any advertising, and they show you whether it's being reported more on the left, more on the right, and they give the news articles ratings, the newspapers, the news sources
Right.
ratings.
They don't even try to be neutral so much as just to let you know
No.
where the stories come from and
what
where
your
they're being
blind
shared.
spots are,
Yeah.
which stories you're not seeing. And then the other one is, I'll come back to that one because it's later in the thing, but I'll highlight that when we get to it. And then we're moving on to phase 3.
Yeah, so phase 3, self-defense, Flashpoint, and so there's different levels of threat that you face at this point in time. As I talked about, often, not always, but often online, you can take your time, and that's something that you want to do because you want to make sure you're having the intentional response from a certain stimulus, and if you can increase the gap between that stimulus and your response, then you can be more considered and more intentional. So relatively mild levels of threat, a post that bothers you or whatever. We talk about 2 Bs and 2 Cs, and some of this we've talked about already. One is breathe, so that you can take the time, have the right body reaction, and engage the parasympathetic in the right way. The second B is boundary. Keep your boundaries, be clear about your boundaries, and make sure that you don't break those boundaries. So, for example, don't give out personal information, no name calling, those kinds of things. I actually watched a great presentation on boundaries, and the example that this doctor, psychologist gave was they're your boundaries, they're nobody else's, right? And so if you've agreed with somebody that they shouldn't call you at after 6 p.m. at night, and then they call you at 6:30 p.m. at night, and you pick up the phone, yes, they've broken the boundary, but actually it's not them, it's you. You've broken the boundary because you answered the phone at 6:30. And so the joke we have in our house is, whose boundaries are they? They're mine, right?
I like it.
The other one I've talked about on the C's, control. You have control. The examples that I used you can block somebody on most media platforms. You can hang up just because somebody is being urgent or aggressive with you. Doesn't mean you have to answer them. And then community, the example I gave of my mum, you can reach out to family, friends, and engage the community and get help from them. There's also obvious ways, if you can in a situation, just like a physical interaction that you're having from a martial arts perspective. Obviously, if you can de-escalate it, that's something that you want to do. Often I will use humor, both in, you've probably seen some of that already, but both in personal interactions, but obviously online as well. You can engage the community online as well. That's Matthew talked about communities that he was in online. We talked about taking a breath and taking time, so you want to do that. And again, clarity is kindness, so be clear about your boundaries and enforce those boundaries. I think the other thing then is we all have biases. Matthew talks a little bit about this, like, do you have an open mind? And I think one of the most important skills people need these days, particularly in the world of AI, is critical thinking. And so how do you engage online with some critical thinking? So obviously researching the sources is key. You can go to, in fact, Sharon, you talked about this, I think, as well, making sure there is a credible source for information, whether that's online, whether that's emails or content. on websites, there's an About Us section, so you can find out what their bias is. How is it published? Is it an academic journal? Is it a credible medical site? Whatever the context of the stories are. What are the sources of the content? Is there credible research behind it? What's the tone and language of just like you're having a conversation with somebody, in the real world. I guess it is a real world online, but like face to face, if somebody starts shouting at you or whatever, that's not a great conversation. And in fact, my personal point of view is a lot of social media is not designed for a conversation. It's what I call advocacy rather than inquiry. People are advocating their point of view. Well, this is what I think. Well, this is what I think. But nobody's asking, well, why do you think that? There's no inquiry. There's only advocacy. And again, that's not a great way to have a conversation with somebody if you're just...
And it's really important to ask people why they think something. That's really...
Information needs to go both ways.
Fosters dialogue.
Yeah. If it goes one way, it's not a conversation.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's just telling.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of social media is, people telling their point of view. So that's the critical thinking and the research is important. So then if it's a moderate threat, again, I used examples in the stories I talked about earlier on. My mum hung up and we're not engaged with that scammer. The other person in my family blocked the person that was trying to get her phone number. Obviously, if it's gets more significant than that and it starts to move towards harassment, you can report it. Obviously, you can leave social media and go to a different app and so on. And then the high level of threat, something's been compromised. Your personal information's been compromised. The harassment has escalated. You've actually been scammed or extorted. And one of the important things is obviously to step away from the high pressure situation and get help. And I think one of the important things as well is to know it's not your fault. I was watching a program, I think it was on the BBC actually, but the television, and there was a police officer she was actually responsible, I think, in the UK for certainly cyber crimes, and she herself had been scammed. And so you got, a professional who's in the industry being scammed. If you're scammed or something's compromised, again, it's not your fault. You are the victim, and there is actions that you can take. I actually was almost scammed probably a couple of years ago, I worked probably 70 or 80 hours this week. I was going to get on a ferry. It was 8 o'clock at night. I was about to lose internet access. And I got this email from Apple, wasn't from Apple obviously, saying this amount of dollars is going to go through your account. I think it's quite common now, but it wasn't at that point in time. And if you didn't validate it, it was going to go through. And so I was tired, I wasn't thinking, clicked on the link. And then fortunately I have two-factor authentication, and it came up and said, oh, you're trying to access your account from California. Is that what you want to do? And obviously I'm not in California, so no. So fortunately I was safe. But I think, especially today, there's a book called Margin by Dr. David Svensson that was written about 20 years ago that talks about how nobody has margin in their life, and I think that's true. And if you are stressed and tired, then obviously there's a tendency you can make poorer decisions. So what actions can you take in a high threat situation? One of them, obviously, is you can call 911 if you feel like you're in immediate danger. We recognize that 911 is not safe for every community, but certainly if you think it is and there's danger to theft or property or whatever, then that is an action that you can take. As I talked about, and we probably can't emphasize enough, it's not your fault. The example I gave, there's a police officer in the UK was scammed and hacked herself. It's also important to document and to save the evidence. There's several examples. I haven't personally been in this situation, but where if you take screenshots of the interaction, if you take notes, save voicemails, then you have evidence that can be extremely helpful when you're engaging with the authorities, whether it be the police or in court or whatever. And so, again, step back, take the time to do those things. And then enlist the help of experts. We will share a list of sites and content that you can go to, whether it's identity theft, whether you're being cyberbullied or extorted. There is sites and resources available, and we will make sure that we provide those.
Nice.
Wonderful. So a couple other things to note too is, Rich, during rehearsal you talked about on your email you have a feature, and
sure.
Jason and I for sure didn't know about it, and I thought that was really cool. So could you share that real quick?
Sure. This has saved me several times. I think I probably talked about it before. My immediate reaction usually is fight, not physically, but anyway. On Outlook, you can delay your email by as amount of time as you want, and I have a 2-minute delay on my Outlook, and I can tell you, particularly in a business environment, that has saved me more than once. My immediate reaction was, "That's the stupidest thing I ever heard," blah blah blah, and before the 2 minutes is up, I'm able to stop it, take some distance, reflect, and reframe it, and go, "That's interesting. Why do you think that's the case?" Or whatever the appropriate reply is. The other thing, obviously, particularly in a work environment, I was taught, which is super helpful, is if you're about to send an angry email, like wait overnight, and then if you still feel like sending it in the morning, it's probably, I never ever sent it in the morning, by the way. And so it's just, again, it's an example of taking the time, getting some distance, getting some space, reflecting, and making sure the action is intentional. So
Yeah, thank you. And then also, I don't want to discount that a lot of these things are very emotional too. So it might be important to consider counseling and to remember that you are not alone. Other people have gone through these things too. And there are private agencies that also will help you for any of these things if you're the unfortunate victim of these things. Jason, do you want to talk a little bit about recovery?
Yeah, so you've made it through. We had several examples of people making it through difficult attacks. May feel that just watching the news, it feels like an attack. Someone just pointed at me. How do you get back to that phase one? How do we get there, and how do we be our healthiest, best selves in our everyday life? And then also, how do we keep track of things? As Rich was mentioning, reviewing and recording things so that if we see that happen again, we're more well equipped to deal with it. So the first thing I'd like to do is remember to breathe, always breathe. So let's all together, we'll do the visualization. So our hands are in our mind moving up and down, but we're just kind of relaxed here. Head is suspended from above as if by a string. Feet are flat on the ground, if you can. And breathing, lower diaphragmatic breathing from your center. Breathe out first, so there's room to breathe in. Breathing in. And out. In. And out. One more time, deep breath, and release. Good. Many different wellness practices have similar breathing exercises. If you have another one, use it. What you've practiced most will be most effective. Things that you might find around you, Tai Chi, yoga, high intensity exercise, a place where you can work out really hard and not have to think about anything else. Taking a shower or a bath, getting the sleep that you need, being around friends, being around a supportive community. You don't have to necessarily record and report to them, but just being around your everyday life so that you know what is normal and what has not been a normal situation can be really helpful. Also, just being around people in that healthy chemical state helps you to achieve that as well. Go out in nature. I love to get my feet feet on the ground, hands in the dirt, being able to work with some plants. My father worked as a landscaper for a long time, and then also worked with therapy for people. And he said plants were really wonderful when they were sick and damaged. You got rid of them and you got a new one. And people aren't that way. So go out and do some gardening, and you don't have to rehabilitate every plant, although I kind of like to. But that's me. Review. Reviewing is a exercise like breathing that helps to stimulate your parasympathetic. So it not only does it give you the time to process and reflect and help you to be able to know what happened, it also changes your chemistry to be able to deal with what happened more clearly. Record as soon as possible for your own protection, as soon as you're safe, not as soon as possible, as soon as you're safe. Find a way to record, write it down, record your voice, something that helps you to be able to remember. You perceive things so different under high stress. So just 10 minutes later, you may not perceive things the same way. This can help you in a lot of different ways, for your own protection, for legal documents, for therapeutic benefit in the future. Consider reporting. As Rich mentioned, not everybody has the same people that it's safe to report to. So definitely use your own experience for that. Online, it might be a moderator. It could be an online group. I check with my family all the time. I call Matthew, my tech support, and say, we need tech support. What should I do? To the platform. So several of the social media platforms have people that you can get to and let other people know, report stuff. Consider reporting to the media. Reach out to the news. Sharon has reached out to the news on a couple times, sometimes to no effect and sometimes to serious effect. So give them the opportunity to do the right thing that way. Reaching out to the government, if that's the right place and the right time. All of those different things. Reaching out to law enforcement. I do find if you are familiar with law enforcement under a non-stressful situation, it's much easier to interact them under a stressful situation as well. I'd like to end up with some final thoughts from everyone. I think this is a really good way also of kind of getting in that right place. Final thoughts people have about everything.
I think the biggest thing for me is just to take that pause and take a breath and maybe walk away from it. But just remember, since unlike a real physical attack, there's probably not the same urgency that I'm going to be physically hurt from this, so I can take as much time as I want. That's mine.
I'd say mine is that there's a lot of nuance in face-to-face conversation. So like the physical tone that we use to describe things, like our body language and things like that, online, people don't have that luxury. So there's also going to be a lot of interactions you may encounter that may not have the same kind of intention coming across in the words. Like sometimes something may be perceived more negatively than it is intended to be. So if you do find that you feel like somebody, particularly somebody you enjoy talking to, might seem a particular more amount hostile or disagreeable than normal, you might want to try and clarify a little bit extra, just because you're missing a lot of that really important information when you're online.
I like it. I think seeing your intuition, your emotions, the fight or flight response, understanding that those are senses and you should listen to them, but you shouldn't let them make your decisions for you. That we want to be, like Sharon said, if you have the time to take and evaluate, don't confuse the two. So pay attention to them, they're very important, and then make the best decision that you can.
For me, I think it's probably the principles of the martial arts applied online, which is first and foremost, it's about self-protection. It's not about winning or losing. an argument or whatever the context is. It's about staying safe online. As I talked about, you control the distance, you control the fight, so you have control. It can be expressed in different ways. It's getting time and distance, as they've talked about. It's also about enforcing the boundaries. By the way, people in power generally don't like it when you enforce the boundaries, but you can do it politely, and you are in control. And it's about being intentional about your response. Is the media fulfilling your why? Your response, ensuring that your response is intentional and not reckless. And then I think the other thing I would just say is step away from online every now and again and do something that gives you joy. Martial arts gives us joy. It's obviously very effective, but it also gives us joy. So do something that gives you joy.
All right, I want to thank our panelists for being here today, and to all of you at home for joining us. Please check out our other self-protection videos on our channel, including our Women's Safety series, our Safer Together Community Safety, and our Pride Safety content. And our next series will be Spectrum Safety, covering self-protection for people with a disability and or people who are neurodivergent. I hope you can join us for that. That'll be sometime in May. And that's all. Thank you for joining us.
Don't forget to check out all of our other social media platforms as well.
Perfect.
Thank you.
you.
Bye.